This past weekend at the annual Muslim Day parade in New York City, hundreds marched on Madison Avenue and they were waving various flags. And among those flags was this one. Some flags that aren't quite so happy. But you'd have to know what that flag means to get it. Otherwise, it's just it's a black flag with Arabic writing. I wanted to bring in our National Security Advisor for TheBlaze, Buck Sexton, to explain to America exactly what that flag means. And when it was shown flying over some buildings in Madison Avenue, why that's a bad thing. Buck, welcome to the program.
Glenn, thanks for having me on. The black banner, also known as the black flags of Khorasan. Now, this is something that stretches back into the earliest days of Islam. In fact, it references a rising up, if you will, of a Muslim army from a region called Khorasan, and they will have black banners. What's Khorasan? Well, I can show you here, Glenn. Khorasan is sort of this shaded area. It's roughly the stands, if you will. It's Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Iran. You can see, roughly speaking, the area they're talking about. But this comes directly from Hadith. This comes from the sayings of those around the Prophet Muhammad, not the Quran, but also used for Sharia, right. Also used very.
The Hadith is a really scary book, is not, I mean, because that's where it gets really, the Hadith gets really, really intense and also talks, if I'm not mistaken, about the 12th Imam. Isn't that where we get the 12th Imam?
That's exactly right, Glenn. The Hadith is based on something called the Isnad. Now, the Isnad is the chain of transmission, essentially, who was near Muhammad that heard him say this, and how trustworthy do we find that person to be? Thousands of them. But you're asking specifically about the Hadith for Khorasan, for these black flags. Literally the reason that jihadists fly the black flags. We'll just read the Hadiths. We can, because we know what they are. The black flags will come from the east, from Khorasan, led by mighty men with long hair and beards. Their surnames are taken from the names of their hometowns, and their first names are from a kunya, which is a nom de guerre. That's one, but you mentioned the one about the prophecy, Glenn, the Mahdi coming, the end times. That's the other Hadith that mentions this. Messenger of Allah said, if you see the black banners coming from Khorasan, that area, go to them immediately, even if you must crawl over ice, because indeed amongst them is the Caliph al-Mahdi. That means, Glenn, the end times, the end of the world. There are others, by the way, that talk about taking over Jerusalem, of course, as part of global domination.
How many times have we seen the black flags in history? Is this something that is always popping up, or is this... I mean,
it's popping up more now. It's popping up more now because jihadists are on the march in a number of places. When the Umayyads actually were fighting, they were flying black flags. They were involved in that, and that goes back to the earliest days of Islam. When the Abbasid Caliphate took over from the Umayyad Caliphate, they used black flags. These are contemporary black flags, Glenn.
Now,
you see over here.
What do they say?
This is Jabhat al-Nusra. They have on this here, this is called the Shahada, the profession of faith. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. It starts off, La ilaha illallah. That's what this writing is. And this is for Jabhat al-Nusra. That's their version of the jihad flag. This one, which is the one we saw flying in New York City, by the way, this is just the standard jihadist flag. This is a sort of everyman jihadist flag, if you will. This one over here is for the Islamic State of Iraq. Again, black, white writing, same basic principle. And we've seen it, Glenn, flying in Tunisia. We've seen it flying in Libya recently, by the way. We've seen it flying, of course, in Iraq. And, oh, by the way, that's our embassy in Egypt. That's one of the black flags of the Islamic State of Iraq. There, our flag, of course, being desecrated, all the anti-American graffiti. For TheBlaze, I saw this wall. I was here in June, and it's still up there. It's still covered in graffiti. But, Glenn, if that's not scary enough, with the end times and with, we see now, the black flags flying across the Middle East in the so-called Arab Spring, this is the one that actually hits the most home for me. That is the Al-Qaeda in Iraq version of the black flag, the Shahada, if you will. And this is the beginning of a beheading video. This black flag, the one we saw in New York City, that black flag, the one based upon the end times prophecy from the Hadith, from the earliest origins of Islam, that was used as the backdrop for beheading videos across the Middle East, and specifically in Iraq, and it still is to this day. That's what that flag stands for. It's not a resistance symbol.
Okay, so what does that tell you, Buck? I mean, does that tell you, I mean, is this something that, you know, it doesn't necessarily, because you have an American flag, doesn't make you an oppressor or a freedom lover. I mean, you know, whatever. if you have this black flag and you speak Arabic and you're Muslim, do you know what that means?
Well, Glenn, I saw people, if you remember, during the Occupy Wall Street protests, flying Soviet hammers and sickles.
Right.
I saw people flying the flag of the Soviet Union, of radical communism.
And I saw I saw the black flag at Occupy Wall Street too.
Yeah. Do they recognize that Stalin's purges and Stalin's policies killed millions of people, one of the most brutal dictators of all time? I hope they know that history, but they certainly don't factor that into whether they're willing to wave a Soviet flag around here at home. Now, no one's questioning the legality of waving this flag. People can do that if they want, but I would not do that. But we should at least be willing to call it what it is. If this flag is being used as the backdrop for beheading videos, it's not because the jihadists are confused. In fact, it's because we refuse to accept who the enemy is. Some people have started to know more about this. Ali Soufan, a former FBI agent, wrote a book called The Black Banners, in which he discussed some of these issues. There are others who are raising the alarm because, Glenn, we can't say that the Syrian resistance is moderate. Remember, we went through that together here on the show when they're going to put up the Syrian Free Army flag next to a jihadist flag. That doesn't jive because we know what they really want, the return of the Mahdi.
Okay, so can I ask you something, Buck? And we've never talked about religion. I've only got about 90 seconds, so we should come back and do another episode together on this. But the end time stuff with the 12th Imam and the Mahdi is really powerfully frightening stuff, and all seems to be a part of what's going on here. Do you buy into this? They'll say, oh, well, Iran's just saying that because it appeals to the people. Is this different than, 1,000 years ago?
Glenn, this is the problem. I don't buy into it, but the people that are trying to take over countries like Egypt and Syria and Tunisia and Libya, they absolutely buy into it. They know these hadiths by heart. Now, some Sunni jurists will say, oh, no, those aren't good hadiths. Guess what? Bin Laden, who signed his first declaration of war against the United States from Khorasan, Afghanistan, he knew that hadith, and he cared about it enough to tell all of his followers. They believe this. They believe it is prophecy, and they are fulfilling prophecy. By the way, of course, it would be in the ruins of Jerusalem. So, Glenn, does it tie into the mindset? Does it tie into the mindset of the jihadists in the region? Of course it does.
Sure does. And unfortunately, it ties into Christians and what they believe at the end of their book as well. Thank you very much, Buck. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Glenn.
Back in a second.